In today's age of reusing older materials, it should come as no surprise that most locomotives nowadays rarely have one owner or purpose throughout their service life. Reliable engines are usually handed down from one Class 1 railroad to another, or to smaller regionals, short lines, and tourist railways. Sometimes, some engines aren't even utilized for their own power, but rather for simpler purposes, such as providing head and power, baggage storage and cab car controls, steam generators, sheds and houses, and other maintenance-related vehicles. The last of these just so happens to apply for one piece of maintenance equipment owned by Penn Central and Amtrak, in which an example of a famous class of electric engines was salvaged in one of the most unique ways possible, as what many now know as the GG Half Snow Melter. When asked what the cleanest kind of locomotive is, most rail fans would answer with an overhead electric engine. Since it involves no emissions from the engine or rail car, the electric wires are separated from hazards, electricity provides more power for engines when compared to diesels, and the electricity is produced by a faraway power plant. Although such green technology is called for now more than ever, the art of overhead electrification was pioneered in the US over a century ago by the mighty Pennsylvania Railroad, with their first such locomotive being the FF1 built in 1917. Although this prototype proved to be too slow for passenger service with a top speed of 20 miles per hour, and too powerful for freight service. The next overhead wire engine the Pennsy would purchase would be the more successful P5 class in 1931, with almost a third of the 92 engines being built with a streamlined steeple cab design. But these engines weren't the best at high speeds, which left the Pennsy to look even further for the perfect electric engine. Only a few years after the first P5s were built, the Pennsy asked General Electric and Westinghouse, two well-known electric engine builders at the time, to design prototype engines. Specifications for this potential P5 replacement included a lighter axle load and more horsepower than the P5, the top speed of at least 100 miles per hour, and a streamlined body design with a single central control cab. Both manufacturers completed their prototypes in August 1934, with Westinghouse presenting the R1 and General Electric presenting the GG1. After many weeks of trial runs between New York and Philadelphia, the Pennsy ultimately chose the GG1 due to its more flexible 4664 or 2C plus C2 wheel arrangement, when compared to the R1's rigid 8-axle frame. Later that year, the Pennsy placed an order for 57 more GG1s, this time with a new streamlined car body, with 13 being constructed by GE, and the rest being custom built by the Pensy's Altoona shops, including the locomotive to be focused on, number 4846, built in May of 1935. The GG1 proved to be so successful on the Pennsy that an additional 81 were ordered soon after the initial batch of 57, as these streamlined workhorses became the flagship electric engine of the Pennsylvania Railroad, pulling practically every passenger train on the newly electrified Northeast Corridor between New York and Washington, D.C. But despite the success of the Pensy's electric empire, the rest of the system started to crumble due to competition from the rivaling auto and airline kingdoms, as railroads across the nation lost more than half of their passenger service, with many of them having to shut down or merge. Even the mighty Pennsylvania Railroad wasn't safe from this merger mania that started in the 1960s, as dire financial status forced the Pennsy to merge with their all-time rival, the New York Central. This surprising merger created Penn Central, which filed for bankruptcy almost immediately after its formation in 1968, with redundant main lines and little profit resulting in severe neglect and decay for most of the system. Yet, the Northeast Corridor was still in relatively decent condition, since it was the railroad's main source of income for passenger service, with many trains still being pulled by GG1s. However, missing from this fleet of reliable electrics was 4846, which was involved in the wreck only a few years before the formation of Penn Central, thus being one of only 4 GG1s, along with 4804, 4831, and 4847, to be retired before Penn Central. But while the other 3 GG1s were scrapped, most of 4846 was salvaged and rebuilt for one of the most unlikely purposes, a snow melter. The locomotive was essentially split in half, and although it kept everything on one side including the pantograph, its left side was slightly extended to make room for the snow melter, which required 2 air vents on top of each other instead of 1, with the melter forming a plow right after the 6 axles where the steam generator used to be, and above it a flat light yellow wall with a single headlight and handlebar. The snow melter was also given an extended cab on its right side, but not on the left, as the newly rebuilt maintenance vehicle was never given a number or designated paint scheme. Oddly enough, as more GG1s were repainted from Penn Central to Amtrak and Conrail liveries, 4846 was never given any paint scheme, work number, or even stencils, as the Snowmelter was rumored to never be on any official rosters. Nevertheless, 4846 continued to move under its own power while under the wire at the Wilmington shops to clear snow and ice on tracks and switches, and was later pushed by other engines after numerous minor derailments while moving under its own power due to being unbalanced. Even though the engine, if you can call it that, spent pretty much all of its life at Wilmington, and gained the attention of many photographers such as Chuck Zieler, and even Trains Magazine, who wrote an article on the oddball and commented, "Wouldn't two of these make a great engine?" Likewise, many rail fans debated the unofficial name of this GG1 split in half, with some suggesting the GG half, GG.5, or G1, based on G representing the Penske's 460 wheel arrangement. But since 4846 was converted to a regular 460, this engine would most likely be classified as a G6, following the previous G5 460 steam engine class. However, the age of the GG1 was coming to a close on the Northeast Corridor, as the last of the AEM7s and E60s were replacing the few remaining GG1s in passenger service, while Conrail discontinued their electrified freight service in 1981, thus rendering their GG1s and E44 supplements useless for freight. With these events, the last bulk of GG1s were sent to Wilmington for scrapping, and despite the stable condition of 4846, the half GG1 Snowmelter was scrapped with its full-size counterparts in August of 1983. Of course, just being half of a legendary engine is good enough to be remembered in railroading history, as multiple online forums recalled the odd tale of this GG.5 and kept the memory of this odd engine alive online, even though there was never a video explaining its history until now. As for the mighty GG1 class, thankfully a grand total of 16 engines have been preserved across the nation in a variety of paint schemes representing the various eras that the class went through. But throughout the years, this unique GG half stayed at Wilmington as a hidden oddity of one of the most unusual conversions for a famous locomotive type. Thank you all for watching this episode of Remarkable Engines. This engine showcases one of the many examples of creative engineering utilized by the Penske, as one of their most famous electric engines was rebuilt for one of the most unusual purposes. As the 30th episode of this series, I figured I should cover an engine that has some sort of relevance to the channel, so I decided to cover a somewhat well-known oddity rostered by the railroad that I named my channel after. Likewise, the GG half was mentioned on multiple online forums but never got its own review video, so what better time to cover relatively obscure engines running from my favorite fallen flag than for a landmark episode of the series. Thank you again for watching. Credit for all the photos used go to their respective photographers, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Have a good day.